Let's do a Colosseum guide. Colosseum waves can be broken up into 4 main parts: dealing with the Fremenniks, dealing with the south spawns, dealing with reinforcements, and then solving the wave. The reinforcements and south spawn solves change slightly from waves 1 to 6 and waves 7 to 11, so we will be going into depth on how to solve each. I'll be demonstrating how to solve these waves if you have max gear or a more budget setup like this. I do want to mention this is for simple and consistent completions. If you want to speedrun, you'll generally want max melee and a scythe almost on everything. Here is how the guide will be structured. There will be timestamps in the description for you to jump to. We don't use too many Runelite plugins, but I like to use the NPC tile indicators. If you hold shift and right click, you can select their color. It can help to color NPCs to their corresponding attack style so you can see their color from your peripheral while dealing with the Fremenniks and know what to pray. We also use the ground markers plugin and the line markers plugin. In the next section, the tiles and lines will be explained in depth. On RuneScape, we're going to go to all settings, and then we're going to type in control and make sure we have the control click to invert run mode set to always. Walking is very important for solving the Fremenniks. Additionally, to save you some time, I would recommend going to Gravestone and having the auto-equip worn items. You will likely die a lot, and being able to re-gear quickly is a nice feature. Moving on to my ground markers and my line markers. Starting in the center, we can see some gray pathways. These can be ignored for the waves. They are only there for the fight against Sol. If you have the Solar Flare Invocation, the flares travel along these pathways so they can be easily avoided. There are 2 marked tiles in the center. These are used to help solve waves, especially waves 7 to 11. If a Manticore spawns on either tile, you will run to the corresponding A or B tile on the northwestern pillar. Here are the A-B tiles you run to, with a tile marked A plus B if Manticore spawn on A and B. Additionally, A is where I run to at the start of the waves to start dealing with the Fremennik. After I attack the melee Fremennik, I control-click the walk tile so I walk to it, while dealing with the rest of the Fremennik. The 3 D-stack tiles are used when we have 3 or more enemies stacked up behind the pillars. The green ones are the more commonly used ones, but the blue D-stack/panic tile has a use in a few solves. We will be going in depth on these tiles and solves in the solve section. The minnow drag tile is used if you made a mistake with the reinforcements and can pull the Minotaur out of the stack. It's red because you shouldn't be using it very often. The start tile is where we want to be when a wave spawns. This isn't necessarily where we have to be at the start of each wave though. This will be discussed in the starting out section. The lazy tile is very situational. It allows us to be lazy with a Serpent Shaman as long as we don't have Myopia 2 or 3. For the line markers, after you run behind the pillar at the start of the wave, you kill all of the Fremenniks and the south spawns between these 2 lines. After you finish the Fremennik and the south spawn, you can peek out of the south pillar, but don't go past the gray lines unless everything else is safe. Here is an example of why we do not leave the lines during the solve. Right now we have 2 Manticores to deal with, which isn't too bad. More often than not, some sort of mob gets stuck behind the northeastern pillar. As long as we are within our lines, they cannot attack us or wiggle free. Once we are ready to engage that enemy, we can step outside of the line and drag them towards us. All of my tile markers and line markers will be in the description for you to copy and paste. For invocations, it's important to know that once you pick an invocation, it is more likely to show up for tiers 2 and 3. So if you get in the situation where you have 2 pretty good invocations, but one is already level 1, you should pick the one that isn't level 1 yet. Here's an example. I've already picked Manti Mayhem because it's one of my favorite invocations. So now I could get it to level 2, but I'll pick Blasphemy because I also like Blasphemy, so I want Blasphemy and Manti Mayhem to show up more often. Everyone has their own preference of invocations, but here's the thoughts on some of mine. My way to start every wave is very simple and takes no damage, so many things like Blasphemy or Relentless don't do anything. I prefer invocations to keep my simple gameplay the same, instead of making me adapt to something like explosions or bees or an extra Fremennik. For my tier list, within each tier, the ones on the left, I would take those before I would take the ones on the right. This means under no circumstance should you ever have Totemic or Red Flag. An important part of learning Colosseum is how to flick Manticores. There's no avoiding this aspect, and you'll get good at it very quickly. Manti Mayhem 1 and 2 will make it so nothing changes, but we don't go Manti Mayhem 3 usually because it can mess up some of our solves. That being said, I would still take Manti Mayhem 3 before any of the red tier. Doom may be controversial, but Doom 1 allows you to get hit 15 times per wave. If you get hit 15 times in a wave, you're dead anyways. Doom 2 and 3 become great once you're more comfortable with the Colosseum. Solar Flare becomes much easier once you learn how to dodge it. If you enter 12826 into the Better NPC Highlight plugin, we can get Solar Flare's True Tile. For Solar Flare 1 and 2, the hitbox isn't active until after it shows up. So right when we see its True Tile on our character, we move to where it was. For Solar Flare 3, the hitbox hurts us immediately, so we will click on its True Tile when it's right next to us. Dynamic Duo is usually an easy invocation, but the spawn point for the extra Shockwave Colossus doesn't follow the rules for the other spawns, and can sometimes destroy a run at wave 11. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. No attacks can be reacted to in Colosseum. What I mean by this is if you see an enemy doing their attack animation, the damage for that attack has already been calculated on you. You can't pray after you see an attack. This isn't something like Zabak where you see it and then pray. What this means for something like the Manticore is we will pray for the bottom orb, then right when we see that orb shoot, we will switch our prayer to the next orb, and then right when that orb shoots, we will pray for the last orb. If the orb shot and you didn't have prayer up, you are taking the damage. If you've done any Inferno, you know that Rangers and Majors will melee you if you're next to them. You don't have to worry about that here. They will still use their main attack style. The same goes for the Manticore. Of course, the meleeers, being the Jaguar and Minotaur, will still melee you. Make sure you trap them so they cannot melee you. Reinforcements spawn 40 seconds into the wave. If you finish the wave before they spawn, you can skip over them. Besides wave 1, you usually won't skip over them. From waves 1 to 6, a Jaguar warrior spawns for the reinforcement. And from waves 7 to 11, a Minotaur spawns. On waves 4, 5, 6, 10, and 11, a Serpent Shaman will spawn with the melee reinforcement. In my opinion, the Jaguar is slightly more difficult to deal with because you have to stand right next to the pillar and skip over potential solar flares. The Minotaur's larger size allows you to step a tile away from the pillar. Sometimes the Serpent Shaman is in front of the melee, and sometimes he's behind the meleeer. It is random, and you should be ready for either scenario. Serpent Shamans have a 10 tile range, and everything else, besides the melee of course, have a 15 tile range. This means we can sometimes use the lazy tile to fight a larger enemy without the Serpent Shaman seeing us, and sometimes an enemy will attack us even though we can't attack them because they are out of range. For my first Quiver, I did max mage with a Bofa for my ranged weapon and a max melee switch for soul. I actually think this is the best first Quiver setup, except I would make a couple of changes. I would bring a Venator bow with dragon arrows and an Ava's assembler to one-hit the mage Fremennik. If you decide to bring a Bofa instead of the Venator bow, you two-hit the mage Fremennik, and this is usually fine. I would switch out the Forgotten Brew for an Imbued Heart, if one is available, and Ancestral Legs instead of my Virtus. I just suffer from Ironitis. I camped Lightbearer for most of the time, but switched to Ultor for my SGS specs so I can recover more prayer and HP. And of course I also used Ultor for Soul. For my current setup, I use range for the most part. This set usually changes a little between runs. Sometimes I swap a brew for an Ultor or another super combat so I can melee more, and sometimes I don't. On this set, I have just enough mage switches to one-hit the Fremennik melee, then I use the Venator bow for the Fremennik mage and SGS the ranger. I also switched Ancients for the Arceus spellbook, so I can cast Thralls and Death Charge. You could uncharge your Shadow to bring another brew or switch instead of soul runes, but I'm a bit too lazy for that. This setup lets me still get chill and consistent runs that are pretty fast, but I don't have to buy so many runes for the Shadow, so I prefer it. Due to having more switches, you lose quite a few potions, so I wouldn't recommend this for a first Quiver. When I stream, I tend to do budget options. Having a 10-tile weapon is very useful for some solves when you consider Myopia 3, so I mostly use Bofa. Stepping down from a SGS, we are using Blowpipe for our spec weapon to heal a bit at the start of waves. We aren't bringing any magic switches because it's not going to be possible for my Trident to one-hit the melee Fremennik, but we can still two-hit him even without switches. We also can't hit 50 with a super combat and piety with the whip, so we're not going to bother doing all the switches when we kill the rangers. We're just going to equip the whip and slap the ranger twice. Even though we're camping a Blood Fury, we don't use too many charges because we're ranging pretty much everything. The order for the Fremennik changes a little bit with this setup. We like to use our special attack to heal off the last Fremennik in case we take any hits from them. Now that we're using a Blowpipe instead of an SGS, we will kill the Major last, so you may want to pray Mage instead of range while dealing with them. We bring Ancients for a Blood Barrage because it won't miss on the melee Fremennik, and we bring a Sandview in case we mess up with Manti Mayhem 2 active. A lot of people like to use the Visual Metronome plugin and set the tick counter to 5. All you have to do is stand on the Start tile, click Start when your Visual Metronome says 1, and then click Tile A when your Visual Metronome says 1. I prefer a different way where I don't have to time clicks or use this plugin. I simply start at Tile A, and then I just spam click Start and start run into the Start tile. Right when I see my true tile land on the Start tile, I run back to either Tile A or Tile B depending on how the Manticore spawned. Both methods work exactly the same, just choose whatever is more simple for you. How you deal with the Fremennik depends on if you have a max setup or the budget setup. Let's take a look at each. As we're running from the Start tile to Tile A or B, we're going to default to pray range unless a Major is coming from the south. We want to right-click the meleeer so we're ready to attack. We don't want to cast it right away because it will drag us from the pillar, and we don't want to wait till he's next to us because he'll get a hit off and he hurts a lot. Right after our shadow goes off, we're going to control-click the walk tile so the melee can't hit us as he's dying and switch into our range gear. We click the mage and run back to the Start tile while switching to our melee gear to SGS the ranger. If you get unlucky with spawns and have to do an A-B solve, we do have to tank a hit from a Fremennik. So we have to go to A, and then we wait here for the mage to see us before we start walking. So the meleeer was able to get one attack before we resumed our flicking. This wasn't really avoidable, it wasn't worth trying to flick the meleeer in this case. For our budget setup, we will be two-hitting each of the Fremennik instead of one-hitting them. Additionally, our spec weapon is a blowpipe, so the order we kill the Fremennik will be slightly different. We will begin the same way as we did the max setup, but as we're running to tile A or B, we will pray mage instead of range, unless a ranger is being dragged from the south, of course. You can choose to blood barrage the melee if you need HP, or just attack him with your trident. You will use the same method as the max setup, but the first hit won't kill him. Immediately run to the start tile, while equipping your whip to hit the ranger. Then start walking to the walk tile again and whip the ranger a second time. Equip your blowpipe to finish the mage, use a spec or two if you need HP. I used a Bofa here because I'm a cheap iron who didn't want to use scales when I have max HP. The main gist of this method is we're walking to the walk tile and then running back to the start between attacks. Moving the Fremenniks makes it so they can't attack while they're moving, so if we keep walking and running back, the Fremenniks don't get many chances to attack you. This will only apply for waves 2 to 6. Don't attempt this on later waves. Due to the Serpent Shaman having a 10 tile range instead of a 15 tile range, and him not getting stuck as easily due to his small size, we can sometimes break out of our barrier I told you not to cross. From waves 2 to 6, if you have a Serpent Shaman and a Manticore coming at you from your south, you can always run north of the pillar to deal with the Fremennik. Sometimes you'll have to deal with 1 or 2 rangers, but you can simply pray range and have an easy time. After the Fremennik are dealt with, get back to your standard wave spot and finish the south spawns. Let's talk about the weird solve we just put ourselves in from the last clip. It actually comes up more often than you would think. The Manticore and Serpent Shaman interaction is a bit weird. If it was a Javelin and a Serpent Shaman in that situation, we couldn't wiggle them off of each other. But the Serpent Shaman will wiggle away from the Manticore more easily for some reason. This allows us to get in a situation where just the Serpent Shaman is attacking us instead of the Shaman and a Manticore. The easiest solution here is actually to just wait and not attack the Serpent Shaman. Remember, when the reinforcements spawn, we don't know if the mage will be in front of or behind the meleeer. If the mage is in front, we don't want to kill the Serpent Shaman blocking our Manticore, because then a mage and a Manticore could be attacking us on the same tick and we have no way to fix it. And when the reinforcements spawn, we can see that the mage was in fact in front of the meleeer, so the mage was going to see us. Now we go kill the new mage first, and then we'll kill the original mage, and then we'll have access to a one-on-one against the Manticore. It is very possible to get a Quiver without ever having to deal with any A or B spawns, but you absolutely need to learn how to deal with a single Manticore attacking you while you handle the Fremennik. You can usually kill 2 of the Fremennik before the Manticore even attacks once. You don't have to rush and kill all the Fremenniks. The Manticore has a significant charging period where you can finish them off between attacks. You can tell yourself a Manticore is just the same as a ranger or a mage appearing there. Stay calm and focused and pray correctly. Taking a Fremennik hit or 2 is fine because you saved the last one to heal off of either way with your spec. Speaking of A-B solves, let's take a look at how to actually accomplish these. The YouTuber PecanBread11 came up with this method to off-tick Manticores from other enemies. He makes very good videos, and I would recommend subscribing to him. At the beginning of any wave, while we are dealing with the Fremennik, we check to see if a Manticore spawned on either tile A or on tile B. If a Manticore did spawn on one of those 2 tiles, but nothing spawned on the other tile, we can treat the wave like normal and deal with the Fremennik while flicking the Manticore. If a Manticore spawns on tile A and either a Major or a Ranger spawns on tile B, you will run to tile A. Remember, you always run to the tile the Manticore spawned on. You cannot move from this tile until both the Manticore and the other enemy see you. Once they both see you, they will stay in the same cycle, so you are free to move a bit to help with the Fremenniks. Here is a situation where Manticores spawned on both A and B. This is a pretty rare situation. Going through my footage, this is the only clip I could find of it. But as long as we go to the A plus B tile and camp it, we should be fine. I hit record a bit late, but I started the wave like normal, but ran to A plus B instead of A. Notice, I used to have this tile named Same Tick, but it is the same as the tile we have now, which is labeled A plus B. We will end up with 2 situations after dealing with the Fremennik. Either there will be enemies to the south, or there will not. If there are no enemies to the south, my recommendation is to wait for the reinforcements.
Starting at wave 7, the reinforcements will heal things if they come mid-kill and get line of sight, so we don't want to try and kill things that we cannot finish. If there are enemies to the south, we want to kill them as quickly as possible, with extra emphasis on taking out the Ranger and the Manticore. A mage will spawn with the Minotaur on waves 10 and 11, so it's okay if a Shockwave Colossus is attacking us because we are praying mage. If a Javelin Colossus or Manticore is attacking us, we want to try our best to kill them before the reinforcements spawn. The general order you want to get rid of the southern spawns is the Manticore first, then the Javelin, and then the Shockwave. After you finish killing the southern spawns, we want to wait for the Minotaur to spawn along the northern edge of the pillar. This is so the enemies behind the pillar make a flat wall and the Minotaur doesn't get trapped. If the Minotaur gets trapped, we will have to use the Minnow Drag tile to pull him out, and this can free mobs stuck behind the northeastern pillar and cause us to get hit.
When the reinforcements spawn from waves 1 to 6, we always want to be on one of these tiles. In these earlier waves, the reinforcements can't heal and won't mess up our stacks, so we can begin killing the enemies behind the pillar without worry. On waves 4 to 6, when a Serpent Shaman comes with the reinforcement, feel free to go behind the pillar to deal with the reinforcements. The biggest thing I see mess people up here is walking away from the pillar due to Solar Flare. Make sure you use the skip we talked about in the Invocation section. Additionally, if you're using a Venator bow, you can abuse the Jaguar if you bring him to the north or the east, and bounce the Venator bow off a monster and the Jaguar like this. Our overall goal for the meleeers is for their southwestern tile to see us, but the rest of them to get stuck behind the pillar. On waves 7 to 11, after killing the southern spawns, we're going to wait behind the pillar unless you are 100% confident you can kill something and get back behind the pillar before the Minotaur spawns. If there is just one enemy, it's best that we wait to the south so the ledge is further from the Minotaur and he doesn't get stuck as easily. When the enemies form a pyramid is when we need to wait at the northern edge to make the wall we talked about. All of these tiles are safe from the Minotaur when he spawns, so feel free to range him from them. The Minotaur has very low defense, so if you have a SGS or Blowpipe, this is a good secondary mob to use them on after the Fremennik. Starting at waves 10 and 11, a Serpent Shaman will spawn with the Minotaur. If you have not finished killing the southern spawns and the Serpent Shaman spawns in front of the meleeer, be prepared to flick the two. Stay focused on the enemy you were attacking. Having a dead enemy is better than having two half-dead enemies. Here's an example of what can happen if you start attacking the enemies before the Minotaur spawns. I thought I could kill the Manticore in time, but instead I just got close and just wasted my prayer points and got the Minotaur stuck behind the pillar. Now we have to use the Minnow Drag tile to get the Minotaur out of the stack, and it's also going to free up the Ranger from the northeastern pillar. In this case, it's not too much trouble, but if it was something like a Major instead of a Ranger in the northeastern pillar, I would have had a worse time. We are now at the final part of the waves, solving the stack. We'll start simple and go on to the more confusing stacks as we move on. Our easiest stacks are when enemies are side by side like this. We still won't run outside of the gray lines, because we want to be in the habit of staying in the gray lines, just in case we ever have anything trapped behind the northeastern pillar that we may have forgotten about. As long as we step out to the south of the pillar, we can engage our mobs one by one. Here is the next easiest stack, and one of the most common you will see. If we have two monsters stacked up like this, we can make them attack us a tick apart by standing in the middle of the pillar right next to it. We're not in a rush, so you can wait for Solar Flare if you want. If we click on an enemy behind the first enemy, it will drag us in a way that the second enemy will always see us one tick before the first enemy. Right when we see the second enemy's attack animation, we will switch to whatever style the first enemy's attack style is. Once again, the Serpent Shaman has an unusual interaction with the Manticore, and you can just wiggle them off so you don't have to flick the two.
You can do this with any two monsters except Manticores. So here we pray range first, and then we switch to pray mage. I move an extra space, you may have noticed, but I'm just doing that because the solar flare is going around, and since they've both engaged me, it's not going to mess up their timing. So you can even run straight to this spot from the middle of the pillar, and it'll work the same. You don't actually have to click the back guy to get set up, it's just running to that first initial square, and then you can go wherever you want. When there is a Manticore with another monster, we don't want to run out like we did in the previous example. We want to start at the south of the pillar and move out. You can either move out by walking or clicking on the monster from the southern edge of the pillar. It's usually best to kill the Manticore first because you have a higher chance to miss up your flicks. Once we see the Manticore's orb order, we will either stay out while attacking the Manticore, if its first orb is the same as the other enemy attacking us, or we will hide behind the pillar if the first orb is a different style. So notice in this clip, we see the Manticore's first orb is range, so we have to hide. Now we can do the strategy we used before, where we stand in the middle of the pillar and click the Manticore. This makes it so the Manticore attacks us first, then we pray mage, which will work for the Manticore's second attack and the shockwaves attack, and then we pray melee. After praying melee, we will pray mage until the Manticore is ready to attack again. Note that if we had Manti Mayhem 3, this attack has a chance to not work if Mage was the third orb. That's why we like to avoid that invocation. If you have a Manticore in front, it can be slightly more difficult. If his first orb is the same as the enemy behind him, it's a simple solve. But if he starts with a different style of attack, we have to do a bit more flicking and the timing is a bit more precise. We will still use the method where you stand in the middle of the pillar and click the second enemy. But now, after doing that, you immediately have to flick the 3 Manticore orbs. None of their attacks will line up. This means when the Manticore charges, you have to wait for the Ranger, in this case, to attack and then immediately go into the Manticore flicks. This isn't much harder than a Manticore by itself, but now it's 4 prayer flicks instead of 3. Focus and you will get this easily. For double Manticore stacks, you always want to let them see you at the same time. If they see you a tick apart, they will have different attack timings and you're gonna get hit. This stack can only happen on waves 9, 10, and 11, but it's fairly easy to deal with. The Manticores will always have the same order and they won't attack at the same time. This means we just do the normal Manticore prayer flicking, we just have to do it twice as often. If the Manticores did see you at different times, just go behind the pillar again and reset their timings. It's fine as long as you didn't die. For triple stacks, if the second and third enemy are the same style, we can solve it the same way as we solved 2 enemies. Standing in the middle and clicking the second enemy will cause the second and third mobs to attack us at the same time, with the first enemy a tick later. In these situations, it's best to kill the enemy in front to avoid having to flick as much. You will see me alternate between clicking a tile too far out and attacking the second enemy. I usually click a tile too far out to get out of the solar flare's path, but you will see on the first tick it puts me on the same tile where clicking the second enemy drags me. As long as that happens, the enemy in front will attack a tick late. This method works exactly the same with a Manticore that starts with a different orb than the other 2 mobs as well. In most situations where 3 enemies are stacked up and the second and third enemies are not the same style, we will want to use these destack tiles.
We will stand at the D-stack tile closer to the line, run to the D-stack tile outside of the dark gray line, wait a little bit for the third enemy to become unhooked from the other two, and then go back to the initial D-stack tile. You don't want to go too far in, because then the third enemy will get stuck on the pillar. Be aware of the northeastern pillar when doing this, as doing the D-stack will free enemies trapped behind the northeastern pillar, so check if anything is there first. If something is there, you can usually D-stack a second time. I've seen a few people recommending running diagonal when you have an easy D-stack solve like this for taking no damage. A diagonal run guarantees taking multiple hits in a situation like this, and there's no reason to take a risk like that and use your supplies when the solve is a simple D-stack. When we use the D-stack tiles, they put us out of range for the third enemy, so we just need to pray against the first two and then switch to the third enemy, style, and go behind the pillar. It's guaranteed to take no damage. This isn't a super tight tick perfect window either. It's simply running to a tile and back while switching two prayers. Now let's move on to what I like to call pyramid solves. These are solves where there's two enemies making a base against the pillar, and then a line of one or two enemies heading out behind that initial base. In most pyramid solves, we want to kill the enemy in the back before the enemy in the front. This usually makes it so whatever two enemies we're flicking, it will either be the same situation or become an easier solution. Killing the monster in front will make it so the other monster in front that make the base of the pyramid will drag forward. We can still usually solve this, it's just a bit more annoying. Even with Myopia 3, on a 10 tile weapon we still have a 4 tile reach, so we can hit the second enemy. So, if you're using a Bofa, a Shadow, a T-bow, or even a Crystal bow, you should be fine. In a pyramid solve, if the guy in the back and the guy in the front are the same style, this includes a Manticore having the same first orb as the tile in the front, we're just going to step out one tile from the southern, so they attack us on the same tick. In a pyramid stack like this, we can consider the second and third monsters to have the same style because Manticores will always have the same thing. So if they're both mage, we will be fine in this situation.
That's a penis!
The trick with pyramid solves is learning how to get them on different ticks. For pyramid solves, instead of the second enemy seeing us before the first enemy, the enemy in front will see us before the second enemy. To accomplish this, we go to the middle of the pillar like before, but now instead of being next to the pillar, we use any tile that is away from the pillar. So now we're gonna kill the back one again, but because they're laid out like this, we can start with range, and any of these tiles, as long as we run out, you can't walk out because it gives the shockwave a chance to move. You have to run out here, and then you're going to do range, mage, and just alternate those two. It's an easier flick than the Manticore, so as long as you can kill a Manticore, you can do this very easily. So you see him attack, and then mage. See him attack, mage. See him attack, mage. So right when you see him start his attack, you're switching to mage. And then you can just switch back. In the situation where no enemy is trapped behind the northeastern pillar, and going to the north of the pillar is an easier solve, feel free to do so. Just as a quick example, like what I was saying, we can go out and in, and this person doesn't see us as long as we're not by the front tile. So if I just go out and in, these two will see us at the same time. So this works all the way up to the back of the room like this. They can see us, but the mage will never see us in second. So that's why this blue tile, it doesn't get used often, but it does get used in this situation. Because, and it's a good thing we don't have anyone trapped in the back pillar, but even if we did, this would still work, it would just free them. But because we have this optional one and we know the mage will see us after the rangers, we're going to start with range. Right when we see him attack, we'll switch to mage and then back to range, and then we're going to run to this one. You got to run back to the green one whenever you're doing these D-stacks. What's going to happen though is this ranger is going to get stuck behind this ranger, and then they're going to make a square where we have ranger, ranger, manticore, major, which works really well in this situation, which is why we're doing the D-stack. We could pray augury just in case we screw it up though. So mage, then back to range. So, didn't take any hits. No even chances to get hit. And now they're lined up very easily to solve. Sometimes you get in the position of the enemies boxing themselves without your input. In these cases, we decide if we want to go north or south. Keep in mind we can't get them on different ticks when they're boxed like this, so we choose the only real option of going north. So, is running between pillars ever useful? Well, yes. In a situation like this, if we did a D-stack, we would have the Ranger and Major on the same tick to the south, and the Manticore and Ranger on the same tick to the north. That puts us in a 50% solvable situation depending on how the Manticore charges. Instead of relying on that 50%, we should go to the back D-stack tiles and run to the southeastern pillar's Panic/Reset tile. Starting at the blue or green tile depends on if we want the first and second enemy to see us at the same time or not. The third enemy will always see us after, so we can switch our prayers for a no damage run. Congratulations, you've finished wave 11 and made it to Sol. Take a quick breather here and drink some water. Before you pick your final invocation and begin the fight, make sure Sol is tagged. You can right-click him sitting on his throne to accomplish this. His area is deceptively large, so having him tagged makes dodging his normal attacks easier. Switch into your full melee gear and organize your potions in a way that they are easy to click on. Additionally, you may not be used to going into your inventory mid-combat, so do a couple switches to the equipment tab, to the prayer tab, and back to the inventory tab. We want your muscle memory to be comfortable going into these menus so you can quickly take off equipment or get to the prayer tab for the triple parry mechanic. You'll want to make sure you're zoomed in enough to see above Sol's head. Our eyes will be focused on Sol, so seeing the equipment slot we need to click on above his head is going to be much easier than reading it in the chat box. That being said, I do keep the chat box open and unfiltered in case I zoom my camera or something silly like that. We want to make dodging Sol's auto attacks as simple as possible so we don't get overwhelmed. He can either do a shield bash or a spear stab. The shield bash attacks in order by hitting these tiles, and then if he does it again, it will hit these tiles. The spear will hit these tiles, and then if he does it again, it will hit these tiles. He can freely switch between the shield and the spear attacks. At the start of the fight, he always begins with a spear attack. So if we go back one tile in the middle, we will dodge it. Now watch where I hover my mouse to make this a brain dead dodge. There will always be a tile that overlaps the shield attack and the spear attack. So right now, right here, if he did a shield or the next spear, it'll be safe. So I hover it, and then I go back before he attacks. Now I'm going to put my mouse back at that middle initial position, because that's the overlap between the new spear and the new shield. So he did a shield, but it's going to be safe no matter what. Now when I hover my mouse, I'm going to be ready for position shield 2 or the spear attack. So now no matter what he does, I will be safe here. So just having your mouse ready makes this a lot more simple, and you're not panicking putting your mouse all over the place trying to react to his next auto attack. If light pools get in your way, you can simply stand back to where you dodged to have him pool forwards towards you, so he's standing on the light pools instead of you. After every phase, he will do a spear attack. You should be in a rhythm for the spear attacks of going side to side, so wherever you are, you should be able to step just one tile back and you'll be safe. Every time Sol does a special attack, either the triple parry or the equipment removal, he will always reset his attack cycle. So moving one back in the middle will always be safe, so you don't have to keep track of where he is through special attacks. When Sol does his grapple attack, you have 4 ticks to click the equipment slot he's talking about. So for back, you click the cape, obviously. If you want to get the perfect parry for extra damage, you're going to click it right as his hand is going towards you. For Sol's combo parry, you have to turn on Protect from Melee 3 ticks after he starts charging, then in another 3 ticks, and then in another 3 ticks. When he goes below 50% HP, this turns into a 3-3-4 tick cycle instead, so the last attack is going to be a bit delayed. If you are a visual person, you can watch his spear. It will stop glowing when it's time to pray. As the fight goes on, more and more lasers will be shooting from the sides. It is your top priority to dodge these. It is much better to take a hit from an auto attack than to take a laser hit. It is useful to know that lasers damage a tick before Sol's auto attack happens, so if you have good timing, you can step into a spot that a laser was and dodge both the laser and the auto attack. Once you get Sol below 10%, he begins his final phase. Pools of light start appearing around the arena and 4 lasers are shooting. This part does not last very long, just stay calm, stay focused, keep doing your auto attack dodge pattern, and watch out for the lasers. If you're getting near the edge of the arena, try and rotate to a different side. Congratulations on your new Quiver. I hope this video helps you all out. It took a lot of time to put together, so if you enjoyed it, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. I hope you all have a fantastic day.